A biker's fist hovers, ready to strike, but a rape is a quiet man who doesn't flinch. In the Iron Horse Saloon, Keanu Reeves endures taunts and spilled beer, yet leaves a note. Be kind, even when no one's watching. It changes a bar's heart. Why does his calm outlast their anger? Can one man's silence shift a room's soul? Join us for a story of dignity, courage, and a legacy that lingers beyond the storm. Rain hammered the roof of the Iron Horse Saloon in Ormond Beach, Florida, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the tension inside. The bar, a gritty haven for bikers and locals, thrummed with life. Neon lights cast a red glow over rows of Harleys parked outside, their chrome glinting through the downpour. Inside, the air was thick with the tang of spilled beer and the low growl of a Lynyrd Skynyrd riff. Bikers in leather vests crowded the tables, their laughter sharp, their eyes sharper, scanning for anyone who didn't belong. A wooden door creaked open, and a man stepped in, shaking rain from his worn leather jacket. He wore a black t-shirt, faded jeans, and a trucker cap pulled low, shadowing his face. No chains, no tattoos, no swagger. Just a quiet presence that seemed out of place in the saloon's chaos. He was Keanu Reeves, but no one knew it. Not yet. He moved to the bar, his boots soft on the sticky floor, and ordered a bourbon, neat in a voice low and steady. The bartender, a young woman named Sarah, nodded, sensing something different about him. A calm that didn't match the room's edge. Sarah, barely 25, wiped a glass with calloused hands, her smile strained from years of dodging crude remarks. She noticed the stranger's stillness, the way he didn't demand attention like the others. As he took a small table by the window, where rain streaked the glass, whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who's this guy?" a biker muttered, his voice laced with disdain. "Looks like he wandered in from a thrift store," another chuckled. "Bet he's lost, looking for a book club." The words stung, not just for their cruelty, but for their familiarity. Sarah knew that judgment, how it felt to be sized up and dismissed. She'd heard it herself, called just a waitress, too many times. Keanu sat, his gaze fixed on the window as if the storm outside held more meaning than the noise within. His fingers brushed a silver ring on his right hand, a gift from a friend long gone, someone who'd taught him that silence could speak louder than fists. The ring was a reminder of a night years ago, when he'd been mocked for his love of motorcycles, told he didn't look the part. He'd proved them wrong, not with words, but by riding thousands of miles, building a life on his terms. Now, in this bar, he felt that same weight, eyes judging him for his quiet, his simplicity. Across the room, Jake Miller, a broad-shouldered biker with a dragon tattoo curling up his neck, leaned back in his chair. His presence commanded the center table, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of insecurity, a need to prove he was king of this small world. He tapped his beer bottle twice, a signal to his crew, and nodded toward Keanu. "Check out the guy at the window," he said, loud enough for heads to turn. "Sits there like he owns the place. Doesn't even take his hat off." His tone carried a challenge, testing the room's loyalty. His friend, Tom Bear Wilson, a giant in a torn vest, snorted, "Looks like a washed-up roadie who missed the tour bus." Sarah's grip tightened on the glass she was cleaning. She hated how easily they tore into someone new, someone who hadn't done a thing to deserve it. It wasn't just about Keanu. It was the same cruelty she faced when customers snapped at her for being too slow or mocked her worn-out sneakers. The Iron Horse was a microcosm of a world quick to judge, where appearances trumped character, and status was measured in leather and chrome. She glanced at Keanu, wondering if he'd snap back, but he didn't. He took a slow sip of bourbon, his face unreadable, as if the rain's rhythm mattered more than the taunts. The bar's noise swelled again, but Keanu's silence stood out, a quiet rebellion against the chaos. Jake's eyes narrowed, sensing a challenge in that stillness. Sarah felt it too, a shift, like the air before a lightning strike. She wanted to say something, to warn the bikers they were picking the wrong fight, but fear of losing her job kept her quiet. Keanu's fingers lingered on the silver ring, his thoughts drifting to his friend's words. "Let them underestimate you. It's their weakness, not yours." He looked up, meeting Sarah's gaze for a moment, and offered a faint nod, as if he saw her struggle too. Have you ever been judged just for being yourself? Picture sitting in Keanu's seat. What would you do in a place that feels like it's already made up its mind about you? The Iron Horse Saloon pulsed with restless energy, the rain outside a distant roar against the clink of glasses and the low hum of rock music. At the center table, Jake Miller leaned back, his dragon tattoo gleaming under the neon glow. His broad shoulders and loud laugh marked him as the king of this small, gritty kingdom, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, a man who needed the room's respect to feel whole. He'd noticed Keanu Reeves sitting quietly by the window, a stranger, who didn't bow to the saloon's unspoken hierarchy. That silence, that lack of deference, gnawed at Jake like a splinter under his skin. He tapped his beer bottle twice against the table, a signal that turned heads. "Hey, old man," he called, his voice slicing through the noise. "You lost? This ain't no coffee shop for wannabe poets." The words landed like a challenge, and the room erupted in laughter, sharp and mean. Keanu didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of his bourbon, his gaze steady on the rain-streaked window. The silver ring on his finger caught the light as he set the glass down, a reminder of a friend who'd once told him, "Let them talk. Their words only reveal their own cracks." Years ago, as a young man with a beat-up motorcycle and a dream, Keanu had faced similar taunts, people who laughed at his quiet passion, saying he'd never fit in their world. He'd ridden past their doubts, mile after mile, proving them wrong without ever raising his voice. Now, in this bar, those old echoes returned, but he stayed calm, his face a mask of patience. Jake's grin tightened. He wasn't used to being ignored. He stood, his boots thumping the floor, and sauntered toward Keanu's table, his crew watching like hawks. Tom Bear Wilson, a hulking figure with a torn leather vest and a beard like steel wool, leaned forward, eager for the show. "What's with you, man?" Jake said, leaning on the table, his shadow looming over Keanu. "You deaf? Or just stupid? I'm talking to you." Keanu looked up, his eyes calm but piercing, like a lake hiding depths no one could measure. "I heard you," he said, his voice even, almost soft. "I just didn't think you said anything worth answering." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any insult, a quiet blade that left Jake blinking. The room paused, then burst into laughter again. This time, not entirely at Keanu. A few bikers smirked at Jake's faltering bravado. His face reddened, and he shot a glance at Tom, who took the cue. Tom stood, grabbed a fresh beer, and accidentally stumbled as he passed Keanu's table. The bottle tipped, and golden liquid splashed across the table, soaking Keanu's sleeve and pooling around his glass. "Whoops," Tom said, his grin wide and insincere. "My bad, old-timer. Hope your fancy bourbon didn't mind the company." He expected a reaction, anger, a shove, anything, but Keanu just sat there. He picked up a napkin, wiped his arm with deliberate care, then dabbed the table dry, each movement slow, unbothered, as if the spill was no more than a passing breeze. "Beer's easy to clean," he said, looking at Tom. "The man's mouth? That's harder." Sarah behind the bar gripped the counter, her knuckles white. She knew this game, had seen it play out too many times. The bikers didn't just mock Keanu for being different, they mocked anyone who didn't fit their mold, including her. She'd heard their slurs, "dumb waitress," "poor trash," hurled at her when tips were low or orders were slow. It wasn't just about Keanu, it was about a world that judged worth by appearance, by power, by noise. She wanted to speak up, to tell Jake to back off, but the fear of losing her job, of being cast out in a town where work was scarce, kept her silent. She looked at Keanu, his calm, unshaken, and felt a pang of shame, not for him, but for herself, for staying quiet. Jake's eyes narrowed, his pride stung by Keanu's words and the room's shifting mood. He leaned closer, his voice low but venomous. "You think you're better than us, huh? Sitting there all high and mighty?" Keanu met his gaze, unflinching. "Not better," he said, "just quieter." The bar's noise seemed to fade for a moment, the weight of his words settling like dust. Sarah caught her breath, sensing something bigger in that quiet defiance, a strength she'd never seen in the saloon's loud posturing. Jake's hand twitched, itching for a fight. But something in Keanu's steady gaze held him back, just for a second. The room watched, waiting for the spark to ignite. Have you ever stayed silent when every part of you wanted to fight back? What would you do if you were Keanu facing a room ready to tear you down? The Iron Horse Saloon seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and the faint crackle of tension. Jake Miller, his dragon tattoo stark against his neck, stood over Keanu Reeves' table, his pride still smarting from the stranger's quiet defiance. The laughter from his crew had faded, replaced by a restless anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Keanu sat unmoved, his bourbon glass catching the neon glow, his silver ring glinting as he rested his hand on the damp tabletop. His calm was a mirror, reflecting Jake's insecurity back at him, and it infuriated the biker. "You think you can just sit there ignoring me?" Jake snarled, his voice loud enough to draw every eye. He kicked the leg of Keanu's chair, hard, sending it rocking. The bourbon sloshed, but Keanu's hand shot out, steadying the table without a glance. "This place isn't for ghosts like you," Jake said, leaning closer. "Get out before I make you." Keanu looked up, his eyes steady, almost sorrowful. "This place doesn't belong to anyone," he said, his voice low but clear. "It's just a bar, a place to sit, drink, and leave the world outside." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that silenced the room for a heartbeat. Jake's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who didn't raise a fist or a voice. He grabbed Keanu's leather jacket from the chair beside him and tossed it to the floor, grinding his boot into it. "Let's see how calm you are now, tough guy," he sneered. The crowd murmured, some chuckling, others shifting uneasily. They'd seen Jake's temper before, but this felt different, off, like a fire burning too close to something explosive. Sarah, behind the bar, felt her stomach twist. She clutched the edge of the counter, her nails digging into the wood. She knew this script, Jake's need to dominate, to prove he was untouchable. But it wasn't just about Keanu. It was about her, too. About every time she'd been called just a waitress, her dreams of college dismissed because she served drinks in a dive bar. She wanted to shout, to tell Jake to stop, but the fear of losing her job, of being cast out in a town where survival was hard, kept her rooted. Then, quietly, she made a choice. She grabbed a fresh bourbon, walked to Keanu's table, and set it down. "On the house," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for them. Not everyone here's like that." Keanu looked at her, his eyes softening. "You don't need to apologize," he said. "Your kindness says more than their words ever could." The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Tom Bear Wilson, looming nearby, laughed, a harsh bark that cut through the tension. "What's this, sir, playing hero for the old man?" he taunted. "Stick to pouring drinks, sweetheart. Nobody cares about your little crush." The crowd snickered, and Sarah's face flushed, the sting of their words too familiar. She'd heard it before, mocked for her worn shoes, her secondhand clothes, her life scraping by on tips. It wasn't just Keanu they were tearing down. It was anyone who didn't fit their narrow view of worth. The unfairness of it burned, a quiet rage she'd buried for years. She stepped back, her hands shaking, but her eyes stayed on Keanu, drawing strength from his unshaken calm. Keanu picked up his jacket, brushing it off with the same deliberate care he'd used to wipe the spilled beer. He draped it over the chair, then looked at Jake. "You think this makes you strong?" he asked, his voice steady, almost gentle. "Throwing things, raising your voice." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I've seen strength. It's not this." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Keanu's mind drifted to a memory. A night years ago, standing by a hospital bed, holding the hand of a friend fighting cancer. That friend, the one who'd given him the silver ring, had faced death with quiet courage, never complaining, never lashing out. "Don't let anger steal who you are," he'd said. Now, in this bar, Keanu held on to that lesson, refusing to let Jake's taunts pull him into the storm. Jake's face twisted, caught between rage and uncertainty. He wasn't used to this, someone who didn't fight back, didn't flinch, didn't play the game. He reached out, grabbed Keanu's new bourbon glass and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet. The crowd froze, eyes darting between Jake's clenched fists and Keanu's steady gaze. Sarah gasped, her hand covering her mouth. She'd seen fights break out here, but never with someone so calm, so unshakable. Keanu didn't move. He looked at the broken glass, then back at Jake. "You done?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any shout. The saloon seemed smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of what was unfolding. A few regulars exchanged glances, sensing the shift. Jake's crew, usually quick to cheer, stayed silent, their confidence wavering. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding, wishing she could do more. Keanu's calm wasn't just defiance, it was a mirror, forcing everyone to see their own flaws, and in that moment, Jake's anger felt small, fragile, like a flame flickering in the wind. The Iron Horse Saloon hung in a fragile silence, the echo of shattered glass still ringing from Jake Miller's outburst. The neon lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room where Keanu Reeves sat, his calm unshaken, despite the beer-soaked table and the jacket scuffed by Jake's boot. Jake loomed over him, fists clenched, his dragon tattoo pulsing with each angry breath. The crowd watched, some with smirks, others with unease, sensing the line had been crossed. Sarah, behind the bar, stood frozen, her heart pounding as she clutched a rag, her eyes locked on Keanu. His quiet strength, his refusal to snap, stirred something in her, a mix of admiration and guilt for staying silent. The air felt electric, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. Then the door slammed open, a gust of rain-soaked wind cutting through the tension. Every head turned as a man stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Chuck Norris, broad-shouldered in a faded denim shirt, moved with a slow, deliberate stride, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. His face, weathered but sharp, carried a steel that needed no words. The saloon fell silent, the music seeming to fade under the weight of his arrival. The biker near the pool table dropped his cue, the clatter swallowed by the hush. "No way," another whispered, barely audible. Sarah's breath caught. She knew that face, that unmistakable aura. Chuck Norris wasn't just a man, he was a legend, and his presence shifted the room's gravity. Chuck's eyes locked on Keanu, and he crossed the floor in a few measured steps, ignoring the stairs. He placed a firm hand on Keanu's shoulder, his voice low but resonant. "Been a while, my friend," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Keanu looked up, his expression softening, a quiet nod passing between them like a shared secret. The crowd stirred, confused, their eyes darting from Chuck to the stranger they'd mocked. Jake, caught off guard, forced to laugh, his bravado cracking. "Who's this, your bodyguard?" he sneered, stepping closer. "What's an old guy like you doing here backing up a nobody?" Chuck turned, his gaze steady, cutting through Jake like a blade. "You just called the strongest man in this room a nobody," he said. "That's your first mistake. You don't want to make another." The words landed like a thunderclap, silencing even Jake's crew. Chuck didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His presence was enough. But he wasn't done. He stepped forward, facing Jake directly. "I've known Keanu for years," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "I've seen him spend days building homes for kids who have nothing, riding miles to raise money for hospitals, all without a single boast. You think strength is throwing a glass or scaring a room? That's not strength. That's fear dressed up as power." His words weren't just for Jake. They were for everyone, a mirror held up to the saloon's cruelty. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not just for Keanu, but for herself. For every time she'd been belittled for her job, her clothes, her place in the world. Jake's face twitched, his confidence unraveling. He wasn't used to being called out, not like this. "So what?" he snapped, his voice shaking. "You think you can walk in here and lecture us? This is our place." Chuck tilted his head, almost amused. "Your place?" he said. "You don't own this bar any more than you own respect. Keanu came here for a drink, not a fight. You made it a fight because you're scared. Scared that a quiet man can walk in, and make you feel small without saying a word. The room was dead silent now, every face turned toward Chuck, his words peeling back layers of pride and insecurity. Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped the bar, her mind racing. Chuck's words echoed her own struggles, being dismissed as just a waitress, judged for her worn-out life in a town that valued flash over substance. She thought of her daughter waiting at home, and how she wanted to teach her to stand tall, not to bow to people like Jake. Keanu, still seated, looked at Chuck with a faint smile, as if he'd known this moment was coming. He touched the silver ring on his finger, remembering his friend's dying words. Strength isn't what you can break, it's what you can carry. He'd carried loss, doubt, and judgment, yet here he was, still steady, still kind. Chuck turned to the crowd, his voice softening but no less powerful. This world kicks down anyone who doesn't shout their worth. People like him, he nodded toward Keanu, or her, he glanced at Sarah. You mock them because they don't play your game. But that's not weakness, that's courage. Sarah's throat tightened, her eyes meeting Keanu's. For the first time she felt seen, not as a waitress but as a person. The crowd shifted, some looking away, others nodding faintly, as if Chuck's words had cracked something open. Jake took a step back, his fists unclenching, his eyes flickering with doubt. He wanted to lash out, to reclaim control, but Chuck's presence and Keanu's unshakable calm made him hesitate. The saloon felt smaller, the walls no longer a fortress for Jake's ego. Keanu stood slowly, his jacket draped over his arm, and looked at Jake, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. I didn't come here to prove anything, he said. Maybe you should ask yourself why you feel you have to. What makes a person truly strong in your eyes? Fists that swing or a heart that stays steady? What would you do if you were in this room, watching this unfold? The Iron Horse Saloon lay under a heavy silence, the weight of Chuck Norris's words still settling like dust after a storm. The neon lights buzzed faintly, casting a red glow over the scattered glass and spilled beer on the floor. Jake Miller slumped back into his chair, his dragon tattoo no longer a badge of dominance, but a reminder of his unraveling pride. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, now flickered with doubt, his hands resting limp on the table. Keanu Reeves sat calmly at his corner table, his leather jacket draped neatly over the chair, his silver ring catching the light as he traced its edge. Sarah, behind the bar, wiped her hands on her apron, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Chuck stood tall, his presence a quiet anchor in the room, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, daring anyone to challenge the truth he'd laid bare. Jake's crew, usually quick to back him, stayed silent, their beers untouched. The regulars who'd laughed at Keanu's expense now avoided his gaze, their faces a mix of shame and unease. Chuck's words had stripped away their bravado, exposing the fragility of their judgments. Sarah felt it too, a crack in the armor she'd built to survive nights like this. She'd spent years swallowing insults, hiding her dreams of a better life for her daughter, all to keep her job in this unforgiving town. But Keanu's calm, Chuck's defense had stirred something in her, a reminder that worth wasn't measured by the noise you made or the clothes you wore. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper, and approached Keanu's table. "I know who you are, Mr. Reeves," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for not being like them." Keanu looked at her, his expression soft but steady. "You don't need to thank me, Sarah," he said. "You're the one who showed kindness when it was hard. That's more than I did." His words hit her like a wave, gentle but overwhelming. She thought of her daughter asleep at home and how she'd tell her about this night, about a man who faced cruelty with grace, who didn't need to shout to be heard. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, and returned to the bar, her hands trembling as she picked up a rag to clean the counter she'd already wiped a dozen times. A voice broke the silence, rough but hesitant. Frank, an older regular with gray hair and a weathered face, stood slowly from a nearby table. "Owe you an apology," he said, looking at Keanu. I've been coming here for years, seen fights, seen people torn down. I stayed quiet tonight like always, but you—" He paused, his voice cracking. "You reminded me of when I was a kid, broke and hungry, laughed at for my patched-up clothes. I learned to keep my head down, but you didn't. You stood tall without throwing a punch." Frank's eyes glistened, and he turned to the room. "We were wrong. All of us." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others looking away, their silence a confession of guilt. The saloon felt different now, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Jake's shoulders sagged, his earlier fury replaced by a hollow ache. He thought of his own life, scrapping for respect in a town that judged him by his bike, his tattoos, his ability to intimidate. He'd built his identity on fear, but Keanu's calm had exposed it as a house of cards. He didn't speak, didn't meet anyone's eyes, but the shift in him was palpable. The crowd saw it too, a man who'd ruled the room now reduced to a shadow of his own making. Keanu stood, his movements slow and deliberate, and picked up his jacket. He looked at Frank, then at Sarah, and finally at Jake. "I didn't come here to prove anything," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "I came for a drink. To sit, to think about a friend who taught me that real strength isn't about winning fights, it's about carrying what others can't." He touched the silver ring, his mind flashing to that hospital room, to his friend's frail hand gripping his, whispering, "Be kind, even when it hurts." Keanu's eyes softened as he addressed the room. "You've all got your battles. So do I. Maybe we're not so different." The words landed softly, but they carried a weight that lingered. Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly wiped away. Frank nodded, his hands clasped tightly, as if holding onto Keanu's words. Even Jake's crew shifted, their bravado replaced by a quiet introspection. The saloon, once a stage for posturing, now felt like a classroom, with Keanu as the teacher who'd never raised his voice. Chuck, still standing, gave Keanu a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson delivered. The crowd parted as Keanu moved toward the door, his steps steady, his presence undeniable. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with gratitude and resolve. She'd been invisible in this bar, just another worker scraping by, but tonight she felt seen. Keanu's calm, Frank's confession, Chuck's truth. They'd shown her that strength wasn't about fighting back, but about standing firm. The room remained quiet, the neon hummed the only sound, as the weight of the night settled over everyone. The Iron Horse Saloon stood still, the neon hum softening as the weight of the night settled over its worn tables and scuffed floors. Keanu Reeves slipped on his leather jacket, the same one Jake Miller had tossed to the ground, now draped over his shoulders like a quiet badge of honor. Chuck Norris stood beside him, his denim shirt catching the faint glow of the bar's lights. The crowd parted silently as the two men moved toward the door, their steps steady, unhurried. Sarah, behind the bar, clutched her apron, her eyes fixed on Keanu's empty table, where a small piece of paper lay folded beneath his untouched bourbon glass. Jake sat slumped at his table, his dragon tattoo a shadow of his former bravado, his gaze lost somewhere between regret and realization. The regulars, once quick to laugh, now sat in quiet reflection, Frank's confession still echoing in their minds. As Keanu reached the door, Sarah hurried over, her hands trembling. She picked up the paper and unfolded it, her breath catching at the words scrawled in Keanu's steady hand. "Be kind, even when no one's watching." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Stay calm, stay kind, after all they did." Keanu smiled faintly, his silver ring glinting as he touched it. "I learned a long time ago," he said, "that kindness isn't about what you get back, it's about what you leave behind." His words hit Sarah like a warm wave, reminding her of her daughter, of the world she wanted to build for her, a world where courage didn't need fists. She tucked the note into her pocket, vowing to share it with her child, to teach her that strength is a quiet choice. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving a cool mist that clung to the gravel lot. Keanu and Chuck stepped into the night, their boots crunching softly, The neon sign flickered behind them, as if reluctant to let them go. They paused by Chuck's old pickup, parked under a dim street lamp, and looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds. "You didn't need me tonight," Chuck said, his voice warm with respect. Keanu glanced at him, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe not," he said, "but they did." Chuck chuckled, nodding. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a moment, two men who'd seen the world's storms and chosen to walk through them with grace. Keanu's mind drifted to his friend, the one who'd given him the silver ring, who'd faced his final days with a smile and a lesson. Don't let the world make you hard. Keanu had carried that lesson through years of loss, of being judged for his quiet ways, of riding motorcycles under open skies to find peace. Tonight, he'd left a piece of that lesson in the saloon, hoping it would take root. Chuck clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You gave them something to think about," he said. "Not many can do that without a fight." Keanu nodded, his eyes on the horizon. Sometimes, not fighting is the fight. Back inside, the saloon stirred to life, but it wasn't the same. A young biker, barely 20, pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he searched Keanu's name. His eyes widened at the results. Stories of a man who donated millions to children's hospitals, who rode with passion, who lived humbly despite his fame. "We spilled beer on Keanu Reeves," he whispered, showing the screen to his friend. The name rippled through the room, a quiet thunder. Frank shook his head, a mix of awe and shame. "He didn't just take it," he said. "He showed us what we're missing." Sarah, still holding the note, smiled softly. She'd been invisible here, judged for her job, her life, but tonight she felt a spark of change. She'd start small, treating every stranger with the kindness Keanu had shown. Jake remained silent, his hands clasped tightly. He thought of his own battles, of a town that demanded toughness, of a life spent proving himself to people who didn't care. Keanu's calm had cracked something open in him, a glimpse of a different way to be. The saloon would go on, but it carried a new weight, a lesson that strength wasn't in the loudest voice, but in the quietest heart. Sarah looked at Keanu's empty table, vowing to make it a place where kindness came first. As the doors swung shut behind Keanu and Chuck, the mist outside seemed to carry their legacy, a reminder that one night could change a room forever. Keanu's story at the Iron Horse Saloon hit me hard. It's a reminder that true strength lies in staying kind, even when the world pushes you to break. I believe silence can speak louder than fists. But I wonder if I'd have the same courage to stay calm under fire. Some might argue that standing up means fighting back, that Keanu should have met Jake's aggression head on. Yet his restraint reshaped a room, proving power doesn't need noise. What do you think? Does kindness win battles, or is it sometimes seen as weakness? Share your thoughts below, whether you agree or see it differently. Thank you for joining me in this story. It means the world to share these moments with you. If it moved you, hit that like button, share with a friend, and follow the channel for more stories that spark reflection and connection. What's the kindest thing you've done when no one was watching? Share it, and let's keep this legacy of kindness alive.